Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome back to Panda AudioBooks, your sanctuary for ancient magic and the pursuit of the truth. Today, we dive into chapters 256 through 260 of Pursuit of the Truth. Su Ming has stepped out of the isolation of the remnants and back into the eyes of the world. But the land of South Morning he left is not the one he finds. The air is thick with the scent of iron and blood as the great tribes prepare for a conflict that has been brewing for centuries. In a world where everyone is choosing a side, Su Ming remains a lone wolf, but even a lone wolf must sharpen his fangs when the pack begins to hunt. Beginning Chapter 256. Chapter 256, Crack I Do. I do not. These two phrases had two completely different meanings. They were like two extremes, like the sky and the earth, and they made Su Ming feel as if his thoughts froze up in that instant. It was not as if he had not been prepared for this. Even now, his second senior brother's words and advice were still ringing in his ears. You must say you don't know. This was what his second senior brother had said with a grave expression. Su Ming was silent. The two different answers were like two different doors standing before him. He did not know what lay behind those doors, and neither did he know which door he should choose to open to see the world that lay behind it. Xianxia did not press him for an answer. He simply looked at him and waited for his decision. Su Ming had a feeling that he should listen to his second senior brother's advice. After all, the grave expression on his face when he recounted that he had given the wrong answer was an expression that was rarely seen on his face. However, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes and he lifted his head to look at the purple-robed Xianxia, who was watching him, and slowly said, "Master, I'd like to witness a battle of arts." This was Su Ming's answer. He went around the question of whether he knew or did not know and stepped out of that circle by voicing out his own thoughts. He did not bother about what would happen if he chose to answer yes or no. Instead, he spoke words that were clearly different from what his second senior brother had told him. The very instant Xianxia heard those words, a brilliant glare appeared within his eyes. That glare instantly illuminated the entire cave and caused Su Ming to be unable to meet his gaze. There was also a sharp stab of pain in his eyes, and he took a few steps back instinctively. Looks like my fourth disciple is quite ambitious. Xianxia's voice was hoarse and filled with a hint of ghastliness. As his voice echoed in the cave, a hint of brutality could be felt from within it. Your eldest senior brother answered with a no, and your second senior brother answered with a yes. As for your third senior brother, he did not give me an answer, he simply pretended to be asleep. You're the only one who did not answer the question as it is and gave me another answer. I will fulfill your desire and let you see exactly what is called a battle of arts. Xianxia waved his arm and a layer of purple fog instantly appeared out of nowhere. It charged towards Su Ming, and in the blink of an eye it enveloped him, and with an abrupt shrinking, the fog stuck to Su Ming's robes and body, turning his clothes purple. At the same time, all of his hair turned purple as well. With that, the master and disciple within the cave were dressed completely in purple. That purple tint exuded a feeling of bloodiness that seemed to have gathered and sunk into the body. It was a feeling that made Su Ming's heart race and his body explode with an urge to kill that was difficult to suppress. There was already a murderous aura within him to begin with. That murderous aura came from the blood moon from his berserker mark. Right then, under the impact of the purple tint, that murderous aura exploded forth with a much stronger intensity and filled the entire cave. A surprised glint appeared in Xianxia's eyes before he laughed boisterously and closed his right hand around the air in the direction towards Su Ming. Instantly, Su Ming was taken away and they disappeared from the cave. Although the murderous aura coming from within them was shocking, Xianxia, who was sitting outside, did not notice anything. In fact, even Zi and Su Ming's second senior brother did not notice anything. Only Su Ming's eldest senior brother, who had isolated himself under the ice river, opened his eyes to small slits, but he soon closed them once again. The air in the sky above the land of South Morning distorted, and Xianxia and Su Ming appeared from within. Su Ming's right wrist was in Xianxia's hand and he was forcefully being dragged. His entire body was in severe pain. Su Ming's face was slightly pale. When he appeared, he instantly turned his head around, and he saw that there was nothing behind him. The land seemed endless. It might be night, but he could still somewhat see that the land was covered in green grass. This place was not Freezing Sky Clan. Su Ming widened his eyes, and shock could be seen within them. The relocation rune may be good, but before there were any relocation runes within the Berserker tribe, how exactly did the powerful Berserkers move around? Only those who respect those from the other realms will imitate, learn, and research foreign objects. It is an act where they discard their roots and place their attention on something not essential to them. Xianxia let out a cold snort. If a Berserker reaches the peak of the Berserker Soul Realm, then with just one step, they can relocate anywhere they want and travel through the world. As long as their bodies are not destroyed, they will never breathe their last. Su Ming felt shaken. He looked at Xianxia and found himself incapable of saying anything even after a long while. I cannot do it either, but with the creation arts, as long as the distance is not too far, I can travel to all the places I went to before if I take an item from the place. However, I must be dressed in purple to use this art. Xianxia spoke hoarsely and let go of his grip on Su Ming's wrist. A fierce and cruel look appeared within his eyes and he looked towards the land. Seventh junior brother, do you know how to battle with arts? With Xianxia's sudden words, Su Ming lowered his head and cast his gaze towards where Xianxia was looking. That place was a grassy plains. There was wind blowing through it at the moment, causing rustling sounds to rise from the grass. Apart from that sound, everything else was silent. After a long while, a sigh came from the depths of the land. Your early fourth senior brother. The moment the sigh came, Su Ming saw the grass in the plains wither away and scatter into the wind in the form of dust. The land trembled, and with a boom, a giant crack opened up in the land as if it was ripped open by two invisible hands. The crack was deep, its end nowhere to be seen. It was dark within, but a brilliant gaze appeared within the crack and it looked towards the sky. That gaze fell on Xianxia and Su Ming. When that gaze landed on him, Su Ming's entire body instantly fell cold, but soon, a bloody red light shone from his right eye, and it fused together with the purple robes covering his body, turning into a murderous aura that seemed to be facing off with the gaze. Fourth senior brother, is that your new disciple? An ancient voice asked from the crack on the ground. The moment his murderous aura met the gaze, a bang went off in Su Ming's head. His murderous aura seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure. However, that gaze did not harbor any ill will. It only swept through his body once before turning away. Su Ming's breathing immediately quickened and he wrapped his fist in his palm before bowing to the land. I am Su Ming. Greetings, seventh uncle master. Xianxia let out a cold harumph before he took a step forward and, in the blink of an eye, he appeared right outside the crack on the ground. He stomped there. Immediately, an illusionary sea of blood appeared behind Xianxia. A brilliant glare formed in the eyes of the stone statue within the sea of blood. It slowly unfolded its arms, which had been wrapped around its chest. At the same time, Su Ming saw the gaze within the crack on the ground disappearing. In its place, a frail-looking person walked out of the crack. His footsteps were not quick, but with each step he took, Su Ming's vision would distort. The man took 5 steps and arrived right under Xianxia's foot. He suddenly lifted his right hand, clenched his fist, and rammed it against Xianxia's right foot. At the same time, a gigantic illusion appeared behind the man. Within that illusion were a countless number of people, men and women, the old and the young, and they were all kneeling on the ground worshipping this person. The ghosts of the land's power is not what we berserkers practice. Seventh junior brother, you're still practicing the arts of the other worlds. This is not creation. The moment Xianxia's hoarse voice appeared, his right foot crashed into that frail person's fist with a bang. As the bang reverberated in the air and shook the skies, Xianxia shuddered and staggered back 100-something feet. However, the frail person within the crack staggered back a few hundred feet before he managed to stop. You were also chased out by our master. The creation you seek has already left the ways of the Berserker tribe. You are the same as me. What do you mean by the same? Xianxia did not act again, but his eyes were filled with a piercing light. I practiced the skills from the other worlds and used them to create my own path. This is my creation. What you practice is something that appeared after combining the skills from the shaman tribe. What difference is there between us? Our minds are different, our spirits are different, our realms are different, everything of us from inside out is different. We are completely different. 15 years ago, you could fight me to a draw while I was in my purple-robed self. Now, 15 years later, you can no longer win against the me in this state. Since we cannot differentiate clearly who is right or wrong, and what constitutes as creation and what is not through words, then we will just see who is stronger. You are wrong. Xianxia swung his arm out and turned to walk towards Su Ming. Su Ming was breathing rapidly. This was the first time he saw Xianxia attack. The power from that one stomp just now gave him an indescribable feeling. It was as if the mysteriousness within that stomp had exceeded the limits of his understanding. He wanted to remember it, but the memory of the stomp in his head and when the frail person hurled his fist forward was slowly disappearing, and he could not control it. When Xianxia went over to Su Ming's side and brought him away from the place, he was still caught in a daze. When Xianxia and Su Ming left, peace returned to the plains, and the frail-looking man lowered his head. He slowly floated back into the crack and sat down within its depths. Fourth senior brother, when you were excommunicated, Master once said that you were wrong. That ancient voice turned into a sigh and the crack gradually closed up. Once the earth returned to its original state, an endless sea of grass covered the entire plains again within an instant and began rustling in the wind. Dark clouds covered the entire sky and rain fell as thunder rumbled. The sky twisted and Su Ming and Xianxia's bodies gradually appeared. The instant the two of them appeared, lightning cracked in the sky viciously and thunder roared. Xianxia had his back turned towards Su Ming and he looked at a fenced-up tribe before him through the rain as he asked Su Ming languidly, "Do you understand now?" Su Ming was silent and his expression baffled. He seemed to have understood it somewhat, but there was still a great cloud of confusion within him. "Let's go." Xianxia walked forward and then landed on the ground. He stepped on the puddles of water on the ground. With the rain falling on his body, he walked towards the quiet fenced-up village in the rain. Su Ming followed behind him silently. At that moment, the figure of Xianxia stomping on the ground had become very faint in his mind. He couldn't remember it, and neither could he retain it. As they got closer to the village, Su Ming heard a faint sound. Crack, crack, crack. It was as a sound that seemed to be made from bones rubbing against each other. That sound traveled forth through the rain and thunder from the ordinary village. Chapter 257. The song ended, and they left. Xianxia's expression was still dark. When he got closer to the gate in the village, he did not slow down. Right when he stepped next to it, Su Ming's pupils shrank as he continued walking behind him. He saw the village gate distorting, as if they had just been moved to another place in an instant without any warning. Xianxia walked in slowly. Su Ming followed behind and walked into the village as well. When the two of them went in, Su Ming turned his head back and found that the village gate had returned to its original state. It was clear that this was not the first time Xianxia had come to this place. At this time, most of the people in the tribe had fallen into deep sleep. Since it was raining, there were no bonfires around them. Besides the pattering rain and occasional rumble of thunder in this silence, the only other sound was that cracking sound that rang repeatedly. It was as if that sound was guiding Xianxia's path as he walked through the village and stepped on the puddles of water. Once they gradually moved past the houses, Su Ming saw light shining through an ordinary beast skin tent before him. This was a small tribe, a tribe that was almost similar in size to Su Ming's Dark Mountain tribe. Small tribes like these numbered too many in the land of South Morning. He looked around him, and when Su Ming's gaze fell upon the tent with light shining within, he could hear the cracking sounds that seemed like bones being rubbed against each other. Xianxia walked up to the tent and lifted a flap before walking in. Su Ming followed behind him and also entered the tent. When he did so, the first thing that entered his gaze was the many bones that lay within the small tent. Besides the bones, there were also some stones in the tent, and most of these items had been turned into zuns. This was the first time Su Ming had seen so many zuns. It was also the first time he saw a zun in the land of South Morning. A shiver ran down his spine. Once he swept his gaze past those zuns, it fell on the old man in the tent. The old man's hair was flecked with white and he was dressed in beast skins, though he did not cover the upper half of his body. Right now, he was sitting inside the tent with a beast bone in his hand and was rubbing it against a stone slab. It seemed like the shape of this beast bone did not match with the bone zun he wanted to make. That was why he had to rub away the unnecessary parts. With a dark expression, Xianxia looked at the old man and walked until he was right in front of him and sat down. His gaze shifted to the beast bone in the old man's hands, which he was still rubbing against the stone slab. The old man looked calm. It was as if all his attention was trained on the bone in his hands, and he did not notice Xianxia's arrival, nor did he notice Su Ming's presence. He sat there calmly and continued rubbing the bone against the stone slab. Cracking sounds echoed within the tent. Some of the sounds even floated out and lingered in the air for a long time. Time trickled by. Su Ming's eyes never left the bone in the old man's hands, and he saw that a corner of that bone gradually became round under that continuous rubbing. Xianxia never spoke. He was also looking at the old man, and changes started to show on his face. Sometimes, he would appear sullen, at other times, he would look as if he understood something, and occasionally, there would be a complicated expression on his face. Rain poured even harder outside the tent. Thunder would occasionally rumble in the sky, and sometimes, the sky would brighten up for a brief moment and leave the shadows of the three people on the skin of the tent, but they would flicker and quickly vanish. The old man's concentration made Su Ming arrive at some form of understanding. He did not know at what point of time he eventually chose not to stand but sit by the side and watch the bone being rubbed against the stone slab while listening to the cracking sounds. At that moment, the calmness that had never appeared ever since Bai Su had come to the 9th summit overtook him. At that moment, Su Ming sank into a state that felt as if he had forgotten about himself due to his calm gaze towards the bone. In his eyes, he could only see the bone that was being rubbed against the stone slab. He did not see that the clothes on Xianxia's body seemed to be changing as he sat right before the old man. That change only happened for an instant before returning to its original state. If no one paid close attention to it, they would not be able to see it clearly. Time trickled by. They had no idea how much time passed, but the old man eventually stopped in his act of rubbing the bone against the stone. When he stopped, Su Ming felt his mind jolting back and came back to his senses. He saw the old man looking at the beast stone and lifting it up as if he was inspecting it. After a long while, he changed the beast bone's position and continued rubbing it against the stone slab. The complicated look on Xianxia's face grew deeper. After a long while, he let out a long sigh and stood up. The moment he stood, the old man stopped. When he lifted the bone in his hands once again, that bone had already turned into a zun. There were several small holes in it. Once he gave it a look, he lifted his head, but he did not look at Xianxia. Instead, he trained his gaze on Su Ming. It was a gaze that was as tranquil as water. Those were a pair of eyes that seemed to contain endless knowledge, had seen through the truth behind life and death, understood all that lies within the world, and could contain everything within them. Inside were kindness, peace, tranquility, and a light that made Su Ming fall into a state of serenity once he met his gaze. The old man lifted his right hand and handed the bone zun to Su Ming. Su Ming quietly stood up and took the ordinary-looking bone zun in his hands respectfully. At the instant the old man handed the zun to Su Ming, he suddenly understood the meaning behind the old man's gaze towards him. He wanted him to play it. Su Ming held the bone zun and wordlessly took a few steps back before he sat on the ground and stared at the zun in his hands blankly. The sound of rain falling outside became stronger and thunder started rumbling non-stop in the sky. Su Ming closed his eyes and positioned the bone zun by his mouth before blowing into it gently. He originally did not know how to play any songs on the zun, but over the years, the broken bone zun that could no longer make any sound had kept him company during the nights when he was alone and missing his home. There were many nights where he would blow into the voiceless zun quietly alone, and the melody of the songs in his ears would play inside his mind. Moaning sounds that held a hint of desolation traveled out from the bone zun by Su Ming's mouth and echoed around the tent before floating out and scattering into the air. At that moment, it was as if the thunder outside also fell silent and the rain started falling more gently. They fused together with the moaning song of the zun and played out a song of yearning. Su Ming was bringing out this particular zun's voice, but was also playing out the song in his memories. The one that was making the sounds was the breath from his mouth, moving within the zun, but similarly, his heart also moved. That feeling was a form of remembrance of the things that moved through the passages of time. That moaning sound did not seem to ever change. There was only one simple note, yet its rise and fall had a hint of desolation and age in it. In that quiet night, in the falling rain, and in this unfamiliar land, that sound was brought into existence. It sounded like a lover crying softly, like tribe members calling out to someone as they wiped away the tears from their eyes, like a childhood friend roaring out in anger as he clenched his fists. Xianxia closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the Zun quietly. As he listened to the moaning sounds, the dark expression on his face faded away. The old man also closed his eyes. His expression was calm. This was a very long song. It might have had a name, but Ming did not know it. This song had been played multiple times in his memories, but this time, he truly played it out with a Zun. However, this was not his Zun. The song played by this Zun contained his soul and his memories, but it lacked a feeling, the feeling of home. The song ended. Ming opened his eyes and looked at the bone Zun in his hands. Understanding appeared in his eyes and he stood up so that he could return the Zun back to the old man respectfully. A smile appeared on the old man's face. He looked at Ming kindly and nodded his head. Xianxia also opened his eyes. He did not look at the old man but chose to stand and walk out. Right up till the end, no words were exchanged between him and the old man, but Ming knew that the two of them had in truth spoken 1,000 words to each other through Ming's song. When Xianxia walked out, Ming hesitated for a moment before he followed after him. The two of them left the tent. Rain was pouring heavily from the sky, and it fell on their bodies and on the puddles of water that were formed from the holes on the ground. When they were a dozen feet away from the tent, Ming's footsteps faltered. His gaze was no longer hesitant but filled with determination. When he stopped, Xianxia also stopped with him, but he did not turn back to look at Ming. Ming bowed towards Xianxia and went back towards the tent he had just left. He lifted the flap and went in. When Ming walked into the tent, the old man sitting inside looked over calmly. "Sir, can you repair this?" Ming brought out his bone Zun from his bosom. This was the Zun that held the feeling of home. It had many cracks and could no longer make any sound. Ming placed it before the old man. The old man's gaze fell on the Zun and he picked it up. Once he gave it closer inspection, he nodded. Ming bowed towards him respectfully before turning around and leaving the tent. Then he left the village with Xianxia. "Do you understand now?" Xianxia asked calmly outside the village in the rain. At that moment, though he might still have been dressed in purple, his expression was no longer dark. The first battle was a confirmation with the ways of your own cultivation, and the second. Ming looked at Xianxia and fell silent for a moment before speaking up again. "It's a battle of hearts. The first person who battled against me is my 7th fellow brother. The person who we saw in the second scene, I don't know his name, but I met him by pure coincidence many years ago and saw him creating a Zun once. After that, every single time I experience a change in my heart, I will look for him and battle against him using my heart and my realm." You reached an epiphany regarding picture creation and used it to calm your mind. You do not train your physical body but only train your mind. Perhaps there are other people I do not know of who are walking down this road, but among the people I know, you and I, along with your fellow brothers, are the only ones doing so. I've come quite far, and your fellow brothers have also taken a few steps down the road. Right now, you are about to experience your first change of heart. The change in your heart is akin to another you appearing, Xianxia explained softly. There is no way for me to tell you how to do it. I can only tell you about my experiences regarding my changes of heart. Let's go. I'll bring you to kill shamans in the shaman tribe once I'm dressed in purple. This state will not disappear until I've gathered 1,000 drops of blood from the heart. Xianxia took a step into the air. Ming sucked in a deep breath and mumbled the words change of heart softly under his breath before a glint appeared in his eyes and he followed behind Xianxia. As the master and disciple disappeared into the sky, Xianxia murmured to Ming faintly, "He is blind. Did you manage to see it?" Blind. Ming was stunned. And they left. Chapter 258. The Land of Shamans. There was a wall built on a mountain range shaped like a dragon's spine. It resembled a ring and split the land of South Morning into two parts, the outer and inner parts. That mountain range was known as Sky Mist Barrier. Sky Mist City acted as the center of Sky Mist Barrier. The wall was divided into several equal sections and each section had a guard that would be stationed there all year long. No matter the 4 seasons, no matter how cold or hot the weather was, and no matter how harshly the rain fell, they would not step out of the area which they protected. All the shamans who wished to pass through the section of sky mist barrier they protected to break into sky mist would have to walk over the corpses of these guards. Uncle Master Bai was one of the guards. He would always sit on the section of the wall he protected and look in the direction of where the shaman tribes were located. Sometimes, he would seem melancholic, and at other times, there would be a complicated look on his face. The sky was starting to brighten up, but the land was still shrouded in darkness and fog. He could not see too far into the distance. Uncle Master Bai lowered his head and closed his eyes, hiding away the emotions in his eyes. Yet at the moment his eyelids fully closed down, he opened his eyes once again swiftly and a brilliant glint appeared briefly within them. At the same time, the sky behind him twisted and two purple-clad people walked out from within the distortion. These two people were naturally Xianxia and Ming. Uncle Master Bai frowned, but he did not turn his head back. Instead, he closed his eyes once again and let the purple-robed Xianxia approach him, then walk past him and out of sky mist barrier. Ming followed behind Xianxia and met his Uncle Master Bai once again on the wall. He did not know why, but he felt relieved when he saw the man. He still remembered that he had spoken to this Uncle Master Bai at this place, and this man, who gained his respect and gave him a sense of closeness, had later fought against a woman of the shaman tribe. The two people had stirred up a vast and mighty presence as they fought, causing the Ming at that time to be unable to remain close. He had always been somewhat worried about the man. Now that he saw him again, when Ming walked past his Uncle Master Bai, he turned his head around and smiled at him. When he did so, the man opened his eyes and cast a glance at him. "You must be able to protect yourself if you follow that crazy old man." As he spoke, he seized the air with his right hand. A white scale the size of a fingernail instantly appeared out of thin air and he pushed it towards Ming. "Take this. It contains the power of an attack of mine. Use it to defend yourself." Once Uncle Master Bai finished speaking, he closed his eyes. When Ming held a white scale in his hands, it started gushing with life force and lifted his spirits. He wrapped his fist in his palm towards Uncle Master Bai. He might have only met the person before him twice, but that sense of cordiality he felt towards the man did not fade due to them not meeting up often. It became even stronger instead. The moment Ming walked out of sky mist barrier, he took a deep breath. The bloodiness and desolate feeling he had had when he first stood on sky mist barrier and looked out appeared once again in his heart. This land was an unfamiliar place to him. It contained the hatred between two different races that could not be wiped away. This hate had lingered in this place for a long time, and had eventually turned into a depressing and heavy feeling that pressed against all the hearts of the berserkers who just walked into the land. That depressing feeling would make their breathing quicken to the point they would feel as if they could not breathe and would suffocate at any moment. As Ming and Xianxia charged forward in an insolent manner, that feeling became stronger. The further they got, the stronger the feeling became, until eventually Ming could even hear his heart racing and pounding against his chest. The wind that was blowing against him from the distance seemed to contain a force that rejected all those unfamiliar to the land. It was as if it also contained the same hate from the land towards the two unwelcomed guests. It was a force that spoke of killing and slaughter until one side eventually died once the berserkers met with the shamans. Compared to the depressing and oppressive feeling Ming had, the brutality on Xianxia's face became stronger. His ruthless smile, the blood-red glint in his eyes, and the hint of merciless aloofness that was deeply seated in his eyes turned Xianxia into a man that was incredibly unfamiliar to Ming. As Ming continued watching him, Xianxia suddenly came to a halt and froze floating in mid-air. The sky was bleak and was starting to darken as if dark clouds were starting to gather together. Fourth. Xianxia had his back turned towards Ming and was looking into the distance when he spoke in a ghastly tone. "Watch by the side and draw for me." Ming nodded quietly and took a few steps back. He looked at his surroundings and observed this strange and unfamiliar piece of land. His understanding of the hate between the shamans and berserkers was limited, and it was difficult for him to put himself in the shoes of the berserkers in this land. It was also difficult for him to comprehend the frenzied slaughter between the berserkers of the land of South Morning and the shamans. He did not understand. Xianxia had his hands behind his back and his purple robes fluttered in the wind. His long purple hair also danced along. From the distance, he looked like a purple ball of flames that was burning brilliantly in the land of the shamans. A piercing howl abruptly came from Xianxia's mouth, and at the moment he lifted his head and roared, Su Ming became visibly moved. At that moment, Xianxia overflowed with an unbridled arrogance and a domineering air that seemed to ignore the might of the heavens. He stood in the sky and howled in a manner to make himself known. His voice traveled in all directions and rumbled as it spread even further into the distance. A twisted ripple appeared in the air as if the sky itself was trembling. The fear within the trembles seeped into the ripples and spread outwards. Su Ming took a deep breath. He knew that while this place might not be located deep within the land of shamans and was in fact located just at the border near Sky Mist Barrier, this was still the territory of the shamans. Almost all the tribes that existed within this place were shaman. If a person was alone, that person would have snuck into the shaman tribes and would have taken the 1,000 drops of blood from the heart in secret. That person would definitely not roar so arrogantly like his master and tell the shamans that he, Xianxia, was here. Yet Xianxia did it. With his body that looked like a ball of purple flames from a distance and with an incredibly arrogant manner, he announced his arrival to all the shamans within the area. Su Ming suddenly understood what Uncle Master Bai had meant when he called his master a crazy old man. He also understood why he gave him the white scale. It was clear that this was not the first time Xianxia did such a thing, neither was it his second time. There was a high possibility that this thing happened regularly once in a while. If a race or even a tribe has been attacked like this multiple times over the years in a manner that while their mortal enemy considers it arrogant, but to them is a form of humiliation, then it would definitely attract a certain amount of attention. Once their attention is drawn, they would make thorough preparations towards their mortal enemy's actions. Master has come to this place multiple times, which could only mean that he must have experienced the shaman's prepared attack, but he still chose to do it, and he even told the shamans that he's here. As Su Ming was thinking, something caught his attention. He immediately lifted his head and looked into the distance, and at the moment he saw it, his pupils shrank. In the distance, he saw clouds rolling forth in the sky, and black spots were charging towards them rapidly. In the blink of an eye, those black spots became clear, and they were all ferocious beasts that mostly looked dissimilar to each other. These creatures were not entirely big. They were only about a dozen feet in size, and all of them had a pair of wings which they used to charge towards them. Su Ming also saw people standing on those beasts, and their faces were covered not in berserker marks, but totems that were carved onto their skins. Pay full attention to your drawing. The ruthlessness in the smile at the corner of Xianxia's lips reached its peak, and a murderous aura that shook the skies erupted from his body. Right at the moment he finished speaking, Xianxia took a step forward. Behind him, the sea of blood that originally looked like a mere illusion now seemed as if it was real. Light appeared within the eyes of the stone statue in the sea of blood, and it shone with an excited lust for slaughter. With that lust for slaughter in Xianxia's eyes, Su Ming saw him storm straight towards the incoming mass of black spots. Waves rose in the sea of blood behind him and charged towards the black spots. Roaring sounds reverberated in the air, and Su Ming saw the same brutality and madness on the shamans' faces who were standing on the ferocious beasts. They did not fear death, and all of them bit their tongues to cough out blood. That blood turned into an innumerable amount of blood-red bugs that charged straight towards Xianxia. Some brought out skulls. As they stroked them, black mist shot out and turned into hideous malicious ghosts. Some sat down, and as the beasts underneath them let out shrill cries of pain, their blood and flesh were ripped apart from their bones. That large mass of torn flesh grouped together to form large blood-red giants, and they howled as they charged towards Xianxia. The creatures that lost their flesh and blood only had eerily white skeletal frames left. However, there was a ghostly fire within their eye sockets that burned with an indescribable ghastliness and coldness. There were even dozens of shamans who stomped on the ferocious beasts underneath them and bounded into the air. Their bodies instantly swelled up, and a shocking power erupted from their bodies, turning their physical bodies into their strongest enchanted vessels. They too charged towards Xianxia. Su Ming looked at the sight. All these divine abilities were skills he had never seen before, especially the spell that created the giants formed from flesh and blood while still allowing the creatures to continue living even though they lost their bodies, only their skeletons remaining. It made Su Ming suck in a deep breath. You actually used the spirit medium of the shaman tribe. Looks like you've made even better preparations for my arrival today. You must have waited for many years. Today, I have finally come, and you don't have to wait anymore. Xianxia's ghastly laughter rang in the skies. Roaring sounds shook the sky. Multiple sights appeared at once within Su Ming's vision, and in them, Xianxia was slaughtering those shamans arrogantly and without restraint. The blood bugs that were formed from the coughed-out blood stuck themselves on Xianxia's body, but they instantly turned purple and exploded. Right at the moment the hideous malicious ghosts that came from the skulls closed in on Xianxia, the stone statue within the sea of blood opened its mouth wide, sucked in a deep breath, and the malicious ghosts tumbled into its mouth. Once the stone statue swallowed them all, the brutality and excitement in its eyes grew thicker. Chapter 259. That spoken sentence, Golden Rock. As the giants formed from the flesh and blood of the ferocious beasts charged towards Xianxia, he was also closing in on them with a savage look on his face. They crashed into each other with a bang, and those giants shattered, but Xianxia merely continued onward while laughing madly. All the shamans that stood in the area he passed by would find a bloody hole appearing on their chests, and there was emptiness inside the hole. Their hearts were gone. Their hearts were dug out by Xianxia. Once he crushed them, the blood from their hearts fused into the air and appeared inside his sea of blood. When he saw this sight, Su Ming sucked in a sharp breath. He looked towards the sea of blood behind Xianxia. That sea of blood, could it have been created due to Master's slaughter? He mumbled. The dozen shamans who had swelled up, treating their physical bodies as their strongest weapon, with totems tattooed on their faces, hurled their fists forward with a force that made the air distort. Right at the moment these people attacked Xianxia together, he waved his arm and the purple long robe on his body instantly grew bigger. In the blink of an eye, the purple robe covered the entire area, including the dozen shamans. This scene only lasted for an instant. When Xianxia's purple robe reverted to its original size, bloody holes appeared on the chests of those men, and their hearts were all gone. The spirit medium of the shamans, the spirit medium who only pities the dead but is cold towards the living. I killed one of you before, and I love fighting against people like you the most. Today, let me slaughter to my heart's content. When Xianxia let out an eerie bark of laughter, the sea of blood behind him turned into a giant mouth and opened it wide to swallow the shamans. The moment it swallowed the shamans, many of these shamans trembled, and as they did so, a fist appeared on their chests and started squirming there. Pain appeared on their faces and their chests exploded. Their hearts flew out of their chests and were crushed, then the blood from their hearts spilled out and was absorbed into the mouth formed from the sea of blood. At that moment, a soft, cold snort appeared under the sky in the land belonging to the shamans. Su Ming immediately turned his gaze over and saw an old man in a black and white long robe walking on the land. He had no idea when he had appeared. The old man's hair was flecked in white, but his face was covered in a variety of colors and filled with tattoos. Su Ming looked at it and found himself unable to differentiate the totems on his face. The man stood there and did not even look at Su Ming. His gaze was focused on Xianxia and he lifted his right hand to seize the sky. The moment he did so, the entire sky turned murky, as if the sky had just turned into mud. An oppressive feeling gathered on Su Ming and made his breathing instantly quicken. At the same time, Su Ming saw shadows appearing in the now turned murky sky. Those shadows all had pious expressions on their faces, and from their faces, Su Ming could tell that they were all the shamans whom Xianxia had just killed by ripping out their hearts. These hundreds of souls covered the murky sky, and as the spirit medium seized the air, they charged towards his right hand like rolling smoke. In an instant, as they gathered on the spirit medium's right hand, a transparent drop of water appeared. That drop of water was crystal clear, yet the moment it appeared, a shocking chill spread in all directions. Xianxia laughed coldly and turned around, stopping in his slaughter. The shamans who were fortunate enough to not have died in this massacre quickly retreated and began surrounding the area until they sealed it up. Su Ming was also sealed within the area. I've waited for you here for 15 years. The spirit medium spoke with a hoarse voice. He grabbed the transparent drop of water floating before him and swallowed it. Once he did so, his body started trembling viciously and pain appeared on his face. All you who died in sorrow, the spirit medium, have felt your resentment and sorrow. I am willing to use my body to shoulder your hate and anger. You died in this person's hands. Now that you have died, come to my body. The moment the old man finished speaking, he started trembling even more viciously. As he started closing his eyes slowly, respect and fear appeared on the shamans who surrounded Su Ming and Xianxia. Interesting, a spirit medium who confused souls actually came here. Xianxia licked his lips and ruthlessness appeared in his eyes. Su Ming stood where he belonged. This slaughter had nothing to do with him, he did not need to take any action. With Xianxia over there, no one would pay attention to him. After all, compared to Xianxia, Su Ming was so weak he would not attract any attention to himself. At that moment, the spirit medium opened his eyes. His irises were gray, and at the very instant he opened his eyes, a roar that sounded like an innumerable amount of howls overlapping each other spilled out of his mouth. "Give me back my heart." As he roared, countless bumps immediately rose up on the old man's body. These bumps were all faces. These faces were howling and screeching on his skin, causing the old man to become a terrifying sight to behold. He stomped on the ground, and as it trembled, he flew up and charged towards Xianxia. At the moment he got closer to Xianxia. The old man lifted his arms, then pointed towards the sky with one arm while the other pointed towards the ground. He lifted his head to the sky and roared once again. "Give me back my heart." The weather changed. At the edge of the murky sky, a gigantic hand of bone appeared out of thin air. It charged towards Xianxia with an air of decay. At the same time, another bone hand broke out of the earth, and the ground trembled. It too charged towards Xianxia along with the bone hand from the sky. The ruthless glare in Xianxia's eyes shone, and as the sea of blood behind him enveloped his body, the stone statue that had its arms folded around its chest within the sea of blood spread out its arms in a fashion that seemed slow but managed to clash into the two bone hands that were charging from the sky and earth with one palm facing upward and the other downward. A deafening roar instantly shook the entire world. The bone hand from the sky crumbled and shattered into millions of pieces that disappeared into the air. The bone hand from the ground also shuddered as if it could not withstand the palm strike from the stone statue. It shattered and fell like droplets of rain that scattered onto the ground. With a glint in his eyes, the spirit medium spread out his arms at the same moment the bone hand shattered and let out a piercing howl towards the sky. As he roared and his body trembled, the faces of the ghosts on his skin roared with him, and they charged out of the old man's body. As those ghosts charged out, the old man shuddered and his physical body rapidly withered away. In the span of a few breaths, he turned into mere skin and bones and fell face down to the ground. The final soul within his body also charged out at that moment. The sky was filled with the roars of these ghosts as they stormed towards Xianxia. Xianxia let out a cold snort and was about to counter when two soft sighs came faintly from the sky in the distance. The sighs were very gentle as if they held no rage within them and were so tender that they sounded like a lover blowing a puff of air on your cheek and into your ear. When it sounded, Su Ming turned his gaze in its direction and saw two men walking forth from the sky in the distance. Those were two men who were so beautiful that women would sigh because they could not compare to their beauty. They wore long white robes, and all men and women who looked at them would be attracted by their beautiful looks. Even more shocking was that the two of them came together with breathtaking smiles on their lips while holding hands, and they were walking forward with an air of intimacy as if they were lovers. Split dawn. For the first time, besides ruthlessness and excitement, seriousness appeared in Xianxia's eyes. Even the rarely seen split dawn appeared here. Interesting, choosing a pair of split dawns is not an easy thing. The two beautiful men in white came forth with their hands still held together as if they were lovers. They looked at Xianxia with eyes that shone with a beauty that did not seem to belong to this world. One of them spoke up softly, "I suppose there is a person without a heart around you, one that is formed by the spirits of those who were wronged." As his words traveled forth, the many ghosts charging towards Xianxia suddenly spread out when they were about to close in. Then, with Xianxia serving as its chest, they turned into a gigantic figure. That figure was created entirely from the ghosts. They howled continuously, their voices echoing through the sky. "I suppose you can no longer move, no longer can cast any arts. You have become this person's heart, and then you will shatter." The other beautiful man smiled and spoke softly. Su Ming widened his eyes and his pupils shrank once again. It could be said that this was the first time he encountered shamans. Here, he encountered the spirit medium who pitied the dead, but was cold towards the living. Right now, he saw the split dawn, who seemed to be in control of an unimaginable power. He even saw his master, Xianxia, coming to a complete halt at that instant, just like what the Split Dawn said. The sea of blood around him started disappearing. A murderous look flashed through Su Ming's eyes and bell chimes reverberated within his body. The white scale appeared in his hands, and the green mark of the sword glowed at the center of his brows. His berserker mark appeared faintly on his body. Because not only did he see his master's body freeze, he also saw the figure formed by the ghosts that had surrounded Xianxia gain the form of a person, and his master stood at the location where its heart should be. By the looks of it, it seemed like it wanted to bury Xianxia within it. However, Su Ming also had his doubts. From what he understood about his master, if Xianxia dared to make such a blatant show of his arrival, then he would definitely not act recklessly, but Su Ming just could not figure out what else his master could do. Su Ming was just about to take action during this crisis when a sound rang out. That sound made the expressions of the two beautiful Split Dawns drastically change. It made the old spirit medium who was lying on the ground in only skin and bones let out a cry of surprise, and made the shamans who had surrounded Su Ming and Xianxia sink into disbelief. That sound came from Xianxia. "My shaman beast, I summon you with my voice," as Xianxia's voice echoed in the air. A low growl that shook the sky came from the land in the distance. A huge gust of wind swept through the land, and in the land far away a gigantic golden rock appeared by the looks of it. Its size was about 10,000 feet. This is our sacred beast, the golden rock. Who are you? Why do you know the sacred skill of the shamans?" The old spirit medium lying on the ground let slip a cry of surprise with an expression filled with horrified surprise. Chapter 260. 3 days. The old spirit medium let out a cry of surprise, and in the blink of an eye, that horrified surprise on his face changed to one of shock. He never expected that the person the big shaman tribes told him to kill with an army to possess a sacred beast of the shamans. The shock that came from witnessing a berserker summoning their sacred beast, the sacred beasts that rarely appeared even when the shamans themselves summoned them, was like that of lightning crashing onto him. The shock made his head roar, and besides surprise, his mind was completely blank. Besides the old spirit medium, the beautiful Split Dawns were also shocked. Their expressions instantly changed and disbelief colored their faces. This expression was incredibly rare on these two men. The two of them were sent to this place 15 years ago along with the old spirit medium, and their goal was to wait for the person who would appear in this area once every few years and bring about genocide. Everything was going smoothly when they ran into Xianxia this day, but at the critical moment that one sentence from Xianxia changed everything in a manner as if the world had been turned upside down. The sacred beast, golden rock, no wonder we never managed to gain its acknowledgement and could never summon it even though we've sent our tribe members to its resting place multiple times in the past. So the golden rock already has an owner. But how is this possible? He's from the berserker tribe and doesn't practice the ways of the shamans. How did he get the approval of the golden rock? In the time the Split Dawns sucked in a sharp breath, the golden rock arrived from where it was in the distance. Along with its arrival came a huge gust of wind that made people feel as if an innumerable amount of invisible mountains were crashing into them. The remaining shamans, who had surrounded Su Ming and Xianxia, lost all will to fight when the golden rock appeared. Terror appeared in the midst of their confusion, and they did not dare attack. The golden rock! Oh heavens, it's the golden rock! Uproars broke out at the sacred beast's appearance. The shamans held a level of respect akin to meeting the might of heaven itself in the face of their sacred beasts. This creature was like the totems within the shaman tribe. There was in no way they could fight against it. At that moment, as the golden rock swept past the land and brought with it a huge gust of wind, these people were like floating leaves in the sky and were thrown back. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, the wall of people crumbled down instantly. Su Ming sucked in a breath when he saw the golden rock closing in. Its gigantic body that exceeded 10,000 feet formed an intimidating pressure that made morning sky turn dark in an instant. It was covered by the golden rock's body as if it had just covered the sun. Compared to it, the people around him who were swept away by the huge gust of wind and Su Ming himself were so tiny that they could practically be disregarded. The golden rock forced its way into all their sights in an incredibly arrogant fashion. The moment it closed in, the extraordinarily mighty golden rock shone with a golden light that made it look like a golden eagle. It made the people be unable to look at it. especially into its eyes. There was an aloof look within its eyes, and as it swept its gaze across the land, cracking sounds would appear in the air as if the air itself could not withstand that pressure. The intelligence it had made Su Ming believe without a doubt that it had far surpassed the intellect of all the ferocious beasts he had ever seen. Even the rod snake could not compare with it in this. However, the rod snake was still an infant, so it was only natural that it would have a hard time competing against the golden rock, which was a sacred beast that was famous within the shaman tribes. When the golden rock's eyes fell on Su Ming as its gaze swept through the land, it paused for a moment to look at him, and at the moment it did so, the golden light within its eyes instantly became stronger. It made Su Ming shudder, as if everything about him had just been seen through. Any other ordinary berserker would have lost all ability to think, but Su Ming did not just practice in the ways of the berserkers. He also trained in the skills of aura refinement and turned it into his divine senses. The strength of his divine senses might perhaps be nothing to those in the other realms, but among his peers in the berserker tribe, he was second to none. At that moment, while the divine sense in his mind still could not withstand the golden rock's gaze, Su Ming could at least still tell the reason behind the golden rock's interest in him. Su Ming had a feeling that the golden rock was not looking at him, but at the Han Mountain Bell residing within his body. More accurately speaking, there was something within Han Mountain Bell that the golden rock sensed, and it wanted to take a closer look. Almost at the same instant, the golden rock trained its gaze on Su Ming, the rod-shaped insect-snake hybrid that was recovering slowly in the Han Mountain Bell within Su Ming suddenly curled up from its sleeping, relaxed position within the bell. It lifted its head instantly, and its dull eyes immediately regained their cruel glare. The glare seemed like the last rays of sunlight before the sky turned dark. It seemed strong, but was in reality rather scattered, and hidden within the depths of the glare was the rod snake's pride. It was as if that pride existed within the blood and soul of the rod snake itself. That pride was passed down through generations and existed even now. It had never disappeared. That pride that was hidden within its cruelty made it seem that if they took away the difference between their power, then the rod snake and golden rock did not even belong in the same category of creatures, because within the rod snake's pride was an air of dominance and supremacy. Su Ming noticed that aura. He was shaken by this, and the light in the golden rock's eyes wavered for a brief moment, and Su Ming felt as if he saw hesitation within him, and he even saw the hint of fear lying underneath that hesitation. At that moment, Su Ming had a sudden feeling that the rod snake was like a tiger cub. Although it was small and injured, even if the tiger cub ran into lone wolves, it would still lift up its head and show off its unique aura. That feeling only appeared for an instant. As the golden rock turned its gaze away, that feeling also disappeared without a trace. No one around him noticed it, not even Xianxia. After all, the golden rock's gaze only stayed on Su Ming for a moment. In Su Ming's eyes, it had happened slowly, but in reality, it only lasted for a moment. When the golden rock's gaze swept through the entire land, a huge gust of wind swept through the land. The golden rock lifted its head and with its mouth wide open, it let out a shriek towards the sky. While the shriek might not have been deafening, it still reached its peak in an instant and turned into an indescribable sound wave that traveled in all directions. When the shamans who were swept away by the wind heard the shriek, they let out shrill cries of pain and blood gushed out of their eyes, mouth, nose. They exploded and their flesh and blood scattered into the air. The ferocious beasts under their feet had long since frozen, ever since the golden rock arrived. They were shivering in midair and did not dare move. The sound wave contained a power that made booming sounds echo in Su Ming's head, and his mind instantly turned blank. When he regained his senses, he saw the old spirit medium's head exploding as he cried out in pain. His entire body was dyed in black blood as he fell to the side. Besides the devastating deaths of the shamans around him, Su Ming also saw the two beautiful split dawns bleeding from their eyes, noses, ears, and mouths. They looked pathetic as they ran away with their faces tainted with endless terror. Yet as they ran, one of them could not endure the golden rock's voice and coughed out blood, trembling. As he ran, his body started shattering inch by inch, and before he could make it to 100 feet, he crumbled into a mass of blood and flesh, then disappeared. Only his right arm, which still held onto his lover's hand, remained. The remaining man looked at the arm in his hand and let out a cry of despair, but he did not turn back. He charged forward in a mad dash instead, and a large amount of blood mist seeped out of his body and surrounded him. As the blood mist spread out, His beautiful face started decaying, and in an instant, his beauty turned into horrifying ugliness. However, he still managed to escape and disappear from Su Ming's sight. At the same time, the body of the person that was formed from the ghosts which had Xianxia buried within crumbled and exploded under the golden rock's voice. It turned into the faces that were full of hate once again before they disappeared into thin air. Xianxia opened his eyes. He took in a breath of the bloody stench around him and asked calmly, "My fourth disciple, have you killed before?" This was the first time Su Ming saw such a large-scale massacre, the first time he saw Xianxia act, and the first time he saw the might of the golden rock. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he nodded his head. "I have chased him down. I'll wait for you here." Xianxia cast him a glance and walked onto the golden rock's back calmly. The golden rock closed its eyes and allowed Xianxia to climb onto its back to sit down cross-legged. The power of those two split dawns is equivalent to the berserkers in the berserker soul realm. One of them has died now, and there's only one left. He's also injured, so his power is now only around the bone sacrifice realm. Split dawns are rare among the shamans. Finding a pair like this isn't easy, but he should be very quick. You also stayed around for too long. If you want to chase him down, then you will have to enter into the deep parts of the shaman tribe. Do you dare do it, my fourth disciple? Xianxia asked languidly. Su Ming lowered his head and a light flashed in his eyes. He did not speak, simply turned around and charged towards the direction of the only person who escaped in a long arc. "I will wait for you for 3 days. If you don't come back 3 days later, then you won't be able to come back." Xianxia's voice floated through the air and spread out, falling into Su Ming's ears. However, he did not falter for even a moment. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the distance. Xianxia closed his eyes slowly and sat down on the golden rock to wait. A bleak air covered the entire land of the shamans. The moaning from the wind sounded like mournful human cries. As the sound traveled through the land and the wind blew past the sky, it brought about an unfamiliarity and a depressing feeling that pressed heavily against one's chest. Su Ming charged through the sky belonging to the shaman tribe, yet after he flew for an hour, he frowned and lowered his head to look at the land beneath him. The land was covered in an endless sea of forest. A glint appeared in his eyes and Su Ming flew towards the ground. After a moment, he stepped on the muddy floor in the forest and closed his eyes to spread out his divine senses. After a moment, he opened his eyes and disappeared from the spot. His body floated like smoke, and after a moment, he appeared by an old tree. Su Ming crouched down and touched the wet ground. There was a drop of blood there. He is afraid of being chased down, that's why he didn't fly in the air. Instead, he chose to use the forest as his cover and hide in familiar lands so that he can buy time to recover, Su Ming mumbled, and a smile appeared on his lips. Forests were his home. We have reached the end of chapter 260. Su Ming is now walking among the powerful, and the shadow of the great tribes looms large over his every step. The game of chess has begun, and the pieces are moving faster than ever. Thank you for spending your time in the sanctuary at Panda AudioBooks. If you enjoyed the rising tension of today's chapters, please give the video a like and share it with your fellow seekers. Your support helps us keep the fire of the sanctuary burning through the coming war. Which of the great tribes do you find the most intimidating? Let's discuss the power balance in the comments below. Until our next session, keep your heart steady and your path true.